You stand in the shadowed corridors of Madrid's royal palace, the air thick with incense and the lingering chill of autumn. The year is 1834, and Spain mourns the death of its king. Yet for you, the royal physician, mourning is a luxury you cannot afford. Duty has summoned you, and what waits behind the velvet curtains of the king's private chamber is no ordinary task. It is a command so grotesque, so beyond the boundaries of medicine, that your hands tremble even before you touch the latch of the door. Inside, Queen Regent Maria Cristina waits, her face streaked with tears, her posture taut with dread. She does not look at you directly. Instead, her eyes remain fixed on the figure stretched across the bed, the lifeless body of Ferdinand VII, King of Spain, once called the Desired One, now only a husk wrapped in silks. But death has not erased the menace from his features. Even in stillness, the faint curl of his lips seems to mock you, as if the king's cruelty has followed him into the grave. The queen's voice quivers as she speaks, each word heavy with urgency and shame. She does not ask you to preserve his heart or his brain as is customary for monarchs. No, what she demands is something far more intimate, something whispered about for years in court corridors but never acknowledged aloud. She wants you to preserve the part of Ferdinand that defined his reign as much as his paranoia, his betrayals, or his tyranny. The anatomical monstrosity that shaped not only his private life, but the destiny of Spain itself. You approach the bed slowly, your footsteps muffled by the thick carpets of the chamber. With each step, the weight of what you are about to see presses harder against your chest. The silks covering the body shimmer in the candlelight, concealing the grotesque truth beneath. You hesitate. A physician is trained to observe without fear, to separate flesh from morality, anatomy from soul. But as your hand reaches forward to draw back the sheets, you realize that you are about to confront not merely a medical abnormality, but a symbol of a kingdom twisted by shame and secrecy. What you uncover is more than flesh and blood. It is a grotesque reminder of centuries of inbreeding, of whispered scandals, of wives driven to despair and madness. It is the legacy that courtiers joked about in hushed tones, that physicians recorded in private notes, and that the church locked away in hidden archives. Here lies the true monarch of Spain, not Ferdinand the man, but Ferdinand's deformity, the grotesque burden that defined him from adolescence to death. And as you prepare the instruments for preservation, one thought haunts you. You are not simply embalming the body of a king. You are embalming the very essence of his reign, a reign swollen, distorted, and destructive. A reign that left Spain fractured, his wives broken, his dynasty poisoned, and his people scarred. This, then, is the story of Ferdinand VII, the most perverted king in history. To understand Ferdinand, one cannot begin with the man himself. His story was written long before his birth, etched into the tangled branches of his family tree. The Spanish Bourbons and Habsburgs had, for generations, played a dangerous game with bloodlines. Cousin to cousin, uncle to niece, generation after generation, marriages were not made for love or even companionship, but for politics. Alliances were cemented in church chapels, and heirs were born with the seeds of decay already inside them. Ferdinand was the living proof of this genetic gamble. Born on October 14, 1784, within the vast halls of El Escorial Palace, he entered the world not as a fresh beginning for Spain, but as the latest product of centuries of decline. His father, Charles IV, was a man of soft will, known more for his love of hunting than the responsibilities of ruling. His mother, Maria Luisa of Parma, was notorious for her appetites, for power, for control, and for the company of Manuel de Godoy, the prime minister who all but ruled Spain in her husband's place. Ferdinand grew up in a palace where his father was ignored, his mother flaunted her infidelity, and power was exercised through manipulation rather than leadership. From the beginning, the young prince's home was a theater of humiliation. But the true curse was in his blood. Royal inbreeding had left its mark on Spain before. Habsburg monarchs had been born with protruding jaws, fragile bodies, and feeble minds. Ferdinand inherited something even crueler. The genetic lottery had not given him a limp or a twisted jawline. It had given him a secret so monstrous that it would become both his weapon and his torment. Physicians who examined him as a boy whispered their findings with unease. What should have been a mark of masculinity was instead a grotesque deformity, alien in shape and terrifying in size. At a time when the body was seen as a reflection of divine order, Ferdinand's anatomy seemed like a mockery of God himself. This curse was not confined to his body alone. His mind bore its own scars. From an early age, Ferdinand displayed the signs of someone shaped by suspicion and resentment. He learned that the palace whispered about him. Servants smirked when his name was mentioned. Courtiers exchanged subtle glances when he entered a room. The cruel irony was that his deformity, though hidden beneath layers of silk and etiquette, was Spain's worst-kept secret. He was a prince mocked by his own household, pitied by his tutors, and discussed by foreign diplomats as a curiosity rather than a leader. Imagine being a boy growing into adolescence under such a shadow. At the very moment when others discovered confidence, Ferdinand discovered shame. At the very moment when others were taught duty, Ferdinand was taught humiliation. And humiliation festers. It does not vanish, it calcifies into paranoia, bitterness, and cruelty. Ferdinand came to see mockery everywhere, in the polite bows of ambassadors, in the careful smiles of servants, in the forced courtesy of potential brides. Every gesture, however innocent, seemed to him like an echo of laughter. Spain did not know it yet, but the prince who was meant to inherit the throne was already being deformed by forces far greater than his own anatomy. He was the product of centuries of arrogance, of kings and queens who believed that bloodlines could be purified through incestuous unions. Instead, those unions had created a dynasty of instability. Ferdinand was not simply born into power, he was born into a curse. His body carried it, his mind embodied it, and his reign would unleash it on an entire nation. Ferdinand's childhood was not the golden playground of a future king. It was a crucible of humiliation, a slow-burning forge where shame was hammered into resentment and paranoia. From his earliest years, he lived in a palace buzzing with whispers. The servants had seen enough to know, and servants talk. Courtiers smiled with their lips, but laughed with their eyes. Even foreign ambassadors, men tasked with reporting on Spain's affairs, wrote home not of the boy's intellect or promise, but of the peculiar rumors surrounding the heir. For a young prince raised in the rigid etiquette of the Spanish court, this was unbearable. A royal child is supposed to be the embodiment of perfection, a symbol of divine order on earth. Ferdinand knew he was not. He could feel it in the stolen glances, hear it in the muffled laughter. He carried a body that betrayed him, and he came to believe that everyone around him delighted in that betrayal. As he grew into adolescence, the problem could no longer be hidden. His tutors noticed the strange changes in his demeanor. The boy who once sat in silence now erupted in fits of cruelty. A careless mistake in lessons brought not correction, but a vindictive glare. A servant who entered at the wrong moment did not receive a scolding, but a punishment so severe that it left others trembling. When a young page stumbled upon him half-dressed, Ferdinand's fury turned into sadism. The boy was flogged, his family exiled. The lesson was clear. No one could glimpse the prince's shame and go unpunished. But cruelty was only the surface.
Beneath it lay fear, festering and constant. Ferdinand began to interpret every act of courtesy as mockery. When courtiers bowed, he imagined them snickering. When his tutors praised his progress, he believed they did so with hidden irony. Even when potential brides smiled at him with nervous politeness, he saw derision behind their eyes. This suspicion poisoned every human interaction until trust became impossible. And yet, his paranoia was not entirely baseless. People really were talking. Letters sent from Madrid to foreign courts described him not as a promising ruler, but as a grotesque curiosity. Some reports were clinical, describing his anatomy as a royal anomaly. Others were crueler, mocking him in words never intended for his eyes. But Ferdinand felt their sting nonetheless, and each rumor sharpened his hatred. The boy who could have grown into a thoughtful monarch instead grew into a creature of shadows, watchful, bitter, and determined never to be humiliated again. He learned to wield authority not as responsibility, but as a weapon. When he dismissed servants, he did so with the satisfaction of striking first. When he punished tutors, it was not for disobedience, but for imagined slights. Slowly, cruelty became his armor, a shield against laughter. By the time Ferdinand reached marriageable age, the damage was done. He was not simply a prince carrying a deformity, he was a man whose soul had been shaped by shame. The laughter he heard in the corridors of the palace still echoed in his mind, louder than applause, sharper than loyalty. And he resolved that if he could not command respect through dignity, he would command it through fear. Spain did not yet know the depths of cruelty its future king would unleash. But the foundations were already laid in those early years. A boy mocked for what he could not control. A young man who transformed humiliation into paranoia. And a prince who believed that everyone who bowed before him was secretly laughing. In 1802, Spain celebrated what should have been a triumph for its dynasty. The marriage of Ferdinand, Prince of Asturias, to his cousin, Princess Maria Antonia of Naples and Sicily. To the outside world, the wedding glittered with splendor. The cathedral bells rang, streets overflowed with cheering crowds, and the young bride entered Madrid draped in finery, carrying with her the naive hope of uniting two powerful royal houses. To Maria Antonia, the match was the fulfillment of her girlhood dreams. She had been told that her groom was the desired one, a prince destined to restore Spain's greatness. She believed she was stepping into a fairy tale. But fairy tales end at the altar. Real life begins in the chamber. And Maria Antonia's chamber became a place of nightmares. The first signs of unease appeared even before the wedding night. Ferdinand's valet discreetly approached the bride's attendants with unusual requests. Special cushions, bottles of oils and saves, implements that looked more like surgical tools than tokens of romance. Maria Antonia's ladies-in-waiting were told these were customary preparations, though none of them had seen such devices in any other royal household. Confused but obedient, they complied, arranging the bridal chamber with contraptions they did not understand. That night, when Ferdinand disrobed before his wife, the illusion of romance shattered. Maria Antonia screamed. Witnesses later recalled that she cried out as if she had seen a demon. What confronted her was not merely large, not merely strange, but monstrous. A deformity so grotesque in shape, so alien in form, that the sheltered princess could scarcely believe it belonged to a human being. The fairy tale prince she had imagined dissolved into a waking horror. The scene quickly descended into chaos. Her ladies rushed in, only to find the young queen hysterical, pointing and crying, "Monster! Monster!" Physicians were summoned, not to console, but to instruct. They explained with clinical detachment how cushions must be positioned, how oils must be applied, how the act of consummation must be treated less as intimacy and more as a medical procedure. The royal wedding bed became an operating table. Maria Antonia, still trembling, was dosed with laudanum to calm her nerves. What followed was not love, not even duty, but something closer to sanctioned violation. This became the rhythm of their marriage. Each attempt at conception unfolded like a ritual of dread. Physicians prepared the chamber, servants arranged the aids, Maria Antonia swallowed opiates, and Ferdinand approached as if fulfilling an obligation to his dynasty rather than to his wife. The young queen, once vibrant and hopeful, began to fade. She developed a dependency on laudanum, first to numb the pain, then to numb the anticipation of it. The palace that had once seemed a place of destiny became a gilded prison. Months passed, then years, and no heir appeared. Each failure deepened Ferdinand's paranoia. He convinced himself that Maria Antonia was somehow sabotaging their chances, that her fear and disgust were preventing conception. His response was not compassion, but cruelty. He ordered restraints designed by palace craftsmen to hold her in place, devices of leather and silk that resembled hunting gear more than marital bedding. He summoned astrologers to chart the stars, believing cosmic timing might correct what biology had broken. Charlatans promised miracle elixirs. Mystics performed bizarre rituals in the royal chamber. All failed. Yet twice, against all odds, Maria Antonia conceived. Both pregnancies ended in devastation. The first miscarriage came in 1804, when she was 4 months along. The second, in 1805, carried almost to term before ending in bloody tragedy that nearly claimed her life. Afterwards, she was never the same. Haunted by trauma, addicted to laudanum, she became a pale ghost of the young princess who had entered Madrid with so much hope. Ferdinand's reaction to these losses revealed the depth of his selfishness. He accused his wife of deliberate sabotage, of poisoning herself, of conspiring against Spain by refusing to produce an heir. Maria Antonia, already fragile, began to believe his accusations. She spent her final months in obsessive prayer, convinced that she was cursed by God, begging forgiveness for sins she could not name. In 1807, at only 21 years old, she died. The official cause was listed as fever. The truth was despair. But Maria Antonia's death did not free Ferdinand from his curse. It deepened it. Rumors spread that he had poisoned her, that the palace apothecary's mysterious death days later was no accident. Whispers claimed her suffering had been the price of living with a man whose anatomy was less a gift than a torment. Ferdinand, meanwhile, played the grieving widower in public, but privately he was already searching for another bride, another woman to endure what Maria Antonia had endured. This pattern would repeat itself.
With each marriage came the same cycle: hope, terror, trauma, decline, and death. Each queen entered Madrid as a bride. Each left it as a ghost. The bridal chamber became the stage on which Ferdinand's shame played itself out again and again. What should have been the most intimate of acts became a grotesque performance watched by physicians, whispered about by servants,
recorded in secret notes that would one day find their way into dusty archives. In Ferdinand's mind, marriage was not companionship, but a battlefield, a place where he would prove, to himself and to the world, that he was no monster. But every attempt only confirmed the opposite. His wives bore the wounds of his desperation, and Spain bore the cost of his obsession. The trauma of Ferdinand's marriage did not stay confined to the bedchamber. It spilled outward, seeping into his dealings with courtiers, servants, and eventually his entire kingdom. By the time Maria Antonia was dead, Ferdinand had grown into a man who trusted no one and punished everyone. The humiliations of his youth, combined with the failures of his first marriage, had sharpened his paranoia into cruelty. Servants learned quickly that proximity to the prince was dangerous. A misplaced glance, a whispered joke, even an accidental step into his private chambers could end careers or lives. Those who crossed him disappeared into exile, dismissed in disgrace, or sent to bleak frontier postings from which they rarely returned. Ferdinand had discovered the intoxicating power of punishment. For every insult, real or imagined, he could now strike back. But paranoia does not stop at the level of servants. It climbs, creeping upward into the realm of politics. Ferdinand began to suspect that courtiers mocked him not only behind his back, but in their official duties. A polite bow might conceal ridicule. A carefully worded report might hide coded insults. He developed the habit of keeping secret lists of men and women he believed had laughed at him. Some were guilty. Many were not. It did not matter. In Ferdinand's eyes, mockery was treason, and treason demanded vengeance. This dangerous pattern hardened during the Escorial conspiracy of 1807. By then, Spain's monarchy was already tottering. Charles IV, Ferdinand's father, remained a weak and pliable ruler, dominated by Manuel Godoy, the queen's lover and the de facto master of the kingdom. Ferdinand, resentful of both men, saw an opportunity. He allied himself with nobles and officers who dreamed of removing Godoy and restoring Spain's dignity under a new monarch, himself. But Ferdinand was no revolutionary. He was a coward in the clothing of a plotter. When the conspiracy was uncovered, he did not stand beside his allies. He did not share their punishment. Instead, he betrayed them. In a desperate bid to save himself, he provided full confessions, naming names, exposing plans, and throwing his supposed friends to the wolves. Men who had risked everything for him found themselves in prison, disgraced, or ruined, while Ferdinand begged his parents for forgiveness like a child caught stealing fruit. This act of treachery revealed what would become the defining pattern of his reign. Ferdinand used people when it suited him, then discarded them the moment they became inconvenient. Loyalty meant nothing to him. Gratitude meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was preserving himself. And yet, despite his cowardice, the nobles and common people alike still clung to him as a symbol of hope. They called him El Deseado, the desired one, imagining that he would one day save Spain from corruption and foreign domination. They did not see what he truly was, a man whose every gesture of cruelty, every betrayal, was rooted in the same paranoia that had haunted him since childhood. Inside the palace, his sadism deepened. Guards reported that he delighted in inventing punishments, not because they were necessary, but because they reassured him that he was feared. Fear, after all, was the only substitute for respect he had ever known. The deformity that mocked him in private could not be erased, but power could silence laughter. And so he silenced it with exile, with the whip, and with the slow destruction of anyone unlucky.